guys, so I realised that it's been a hot second since I filmed a currently reading video, and naturally my conclusion was therefore to film a currently reading video. Essentially what this means is that I talk to you about the books I'm currently reading, my thoughts on where I am so far in the book, and then hopefully that will be an interesting marker for when I get around to reviewing and wrapping them up in my wrap-ups. You can see if my thoughts changed or if just different things seemed important to me at that point, because I think sometimes once you've finished a book, some of the stuff you were thinking in the middle of the book has faded to the background. So this gives you like a more full idea of my experience of reading a book. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight in to the books. I'm going to kick things off with the one I'm probably going to finish first because I'm halfway through and it is a comic book, so it's very short. It's a trade paperback, so it is a collection of 5 issues in a comic book series, and this one is Moonstruck Volume 2 by Grace Ellis and Shay Beagle. Now naturally I must have enjoyed the first one in the series, which is over here, you can't see it, for me to have picked up the second one, and I did. I loved the first one in this series and I'm as much enjoying this second one. They are very family friendly, which I know isn't everyone's cup of tea because they might seem a little bit childish and they can be a little bit like cutesy. And although a lot of the characters are college age and are going to college in America, they don't necessarily get up to some of the things that college students might get up to. It's a little bit more like I said, cutesy than that. But regardless, I love it. It's the kind of comic book series I would give to my children one day, that I will still love reading as an adult, and I just think is like for everybody. And I really mean for everybody because the representation in these comic books are incredible. One of the main characters is in a female-female relationship. There are non-binary characters, there are other queer relationships going on, characters from various different ethnic backgrounds, and it is set in a world much like our own. As I mentioned, they're going to college, but with magical creatures. So again, our main couple, the 2 women, are werewolves. We also have centaurs, we have fairies in this volume. So there wasn't fairies in the last one, but there are fairies in this one. And let me tell you, fairies are tricky, which I'm enjoying. I always kind of love that kind of like sassy portrayal of fairies. Vampires, there's like a gorgon here, it's a gorgon. But they're also humans. They just basically live alongside us. They work at the coffee shop, which is a little bit like Starbucks, etc, etc. It's very like ordinary life but with a bit of magic, and it is just great fun. Like I mentioned, a little bit cutesy, so if that's really not your cup of tea, fair enough. I really like the characters and their relationships, and the stories are fun. So like there's a spread from one of the pages to see what it looks like. But I'm not sure there's much else I can say about this one. Our characters, where I'm at, are currently in the middle of getting themselves caught up in something, and I'm sure everything will work out great because that's kind of what these comic books are for. So they really put a smile on my face, and I'm going to finish this one tonight. Something that's certainly a lot less cutesy is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. So I'm 60 odd pages into this and it's 300 and something pages long, but I only started it last night, so I think I read quite a good chunk. As soon as I picked it up, it was a book that instantly drew me in. This is Natalie Haynes' second Greek myth retelling. She previously wrote, again, can you see it? Yes, you can. Children of Jocasta, which is a retelling of the myth of Oedipus and Jocasta, whereas this is a retelling of the myth of the Trojan War from Greek mythology. The war in which 1,000 ships sailed from Greece to Troy in order to take back Helen of Troy. Or, I mean, like, motivations vary because, oh, let me tell you, I'm also reading a non-fiction book about Helen of Troy at the moment. They sail because Helen of Troy has either been abducted or has run away, depends what version of the myth you're reading. Her husband wants to take her back or wants to kill her for like dishonouring him. Again, it doesn't matter what version you're reading. But the general gist, this is a retelling of. I am really, really enjoying this. I actually think, and I loved Natalie Haynes' Children of Jocasta, but I think this is like a step up from that book. I think it is like a real example of where Natalie Haynes has gone as a writer of Greek myth retellings since Children of Jocasta. So I think if you like that, you will love this. If you like Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, you'll love this. If you like The Penelope by Margaret Atwood, you'll love this. It is for all of those readers, and what I like the most so far about this book is that it's not just taking one woman's perspective, it is telling you the story from all the different women of the Trojan War's perspective, which means so far we have chapters which are maybe 4 pages from a perspective of a woman who then dies and we never see again. I assume her narrative's not going to crop back up because she died. So it's giving you an idea of what all the women are going through, and not just the Trojan women actually, because I've just started a chapter from the perspective of Penelope, who is a Greek woman, but obviously she is lamenting that her husband is away from her fighting in this war and has been away for 10 years. So it's all the different women's lives in Troy and in Greece and how they're being affected by this war. I haven't got to a portion in which Helen's perspective has been given yet, and I will be interested to see if that crops up. I can't say right now whether it will or not. I think whether it does or whether it doesn't will feel like a deliberate action and will have its effect on the narrative, and I'd be interested to ask Natalie Haynes about that, which is something that I can do, because the reason I'm reading this right now is not just because I am interested in it, but I'm also interviewing Natalie Haynes for my podcast, so I'm really looking forward to that. So I'm also trying to think of things to ask her whilst I read this. And another thing I'm really enjoying about it is that one of the female perspectives in this book is not a mortal woman, but is in fact the muse Calliope, who Homer is sort of asking for inspiration from when writing his book, and I feel like the muse is kind of Natalie Haynes, just adding some sass into the story, and I really enjoy that. It's got like some sassy sarcasm in those sections that I think are really good, but I am assuming this is not going to be a cheerful book, a bit like Pat Barker's Silence of the Girls. That was a book that had no levity, that was just sadness, but incredibly well written and poignant. This too, I think, just because it deals with such a heavy topic, which is women's experience of war and enslaved women and all of that kind of thing, it's hard to imagine it's going to be very cheerful, but I'm really enjoying the writing. But on the topic of Helen of Troy, I thought I would actually mention a book I'm currently reading for my thesis. Now, I don't usually do this, but I did think this might actually be a book that you would still be interested in, even though I'm reading it for an academic context, and that is Helen of Troy, From Homer to Hollywood. So one of the 4 chapters of my thesis is actually all about Helen of Troy. So naturally I'm reading a lot about Helen of Troy at the moment as I'm writing that chapter up and continuing to sort of build on my knowledge and look for scholarship that is relevant to what I'm looking at from the ancient evidence. And I think this is a really accessible non-fiction book on Helen. It's not just about antiquity, it's about Helen's portrayal in literature throughout the centuries, so going well beyond ancient depictions into kind of modern theatre and everywhere in between. So for that reason I think it's incredibly interesting. It has like modern relevance to it, and yeah, for that it's really interesting. But Helen is one of those topics that I don't regret my thesis, don't get me wrong, but wow, why am I writing a chapter on Helen of Troy? There's so much written about her that it's just like, oh, how am I ever going to read it all? And you know, you have to have a good grasp of the scholarship that's out there on subjects relevant to your PhD thesis. So it's just that there's a lot on Helen of Troy. Thankfully, I do find her a very, very interesting character, and her depiction in literature very, very interesting. Although I said Homer to Hollywood, this obviously goes beyond literature as well and into like other forms of media. But so far I'm finding it very interesting. It does very much blend together the ancient and the modern, so it will be talking about the Iliad in one paragraph and then, like I said, like a modern play in the next paragraph, so it's not as clearly defined between ancient stuff and modern stuff, but I think often looking at material in that way can give you an interesting new perspective and can bring up interesting points of view when you're exploring an academic topic, as long as you're able to distance the two from one another in your head. But I still think it's interesting, and I thought this book is actually one that you might be interested in if you're at all interested in Greek mythology. But lastly, I just started another little book because I cannot control myself, and that is The Short Reign of Pippin, the 4th by John Steinbeck. I've only ever read Of Mice and Men before by John Steinbeck, and I loved it. I just think it's a brilliant book, so moving, so well written, and like I said, I've never gotten around to reading anything else by John Steinbeck. Often my dad would recommend me this one. This is John Steinbeck's only or one of few comedy novels, so it's not like as tragic as Of Mice and Men, it's intentionally humorous. And my dad always recommended this one to me when he was still alive, so it had always stuck in my mind as the next John Steinbeck I would like to try. And then recently my mum decided to read it for the first time and said, Jane, you really do need to read it, you will really enjoy it. So I thought, do you know what, I'm taking it from the bookshelves in Edinburgh and I'm bringing it down here and I'm starting it, and so far so good. I am only like 20 pages in this, although it's only about 150 pages, so that's not too problematic. I'm sure I'll read this very quickly once I dedicate my time to it. And it first came out in the 1950s, it's set in France, and it is about the French deciding to reinstate the monarchy. So I'm sure we've all heard of the French Revolution and the fall of the French monarchy. Well, in this book, basically, John Steinbeck writes a humorous kind of parody in where France reinstates the monarchy, and the person who becomes the monarch is Pippin the Fourth. And so far, he's not become king yet in the point where I've read, but it is funny. He's a funny character, and it reminds me a little bit, less magic realism, but it reminds me a little bit of the writing style of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Jeanette Winterson. It has that sort of surreal, slightly wacky, long, beautiful sentences, slightly humorous tone to it. Although it's not magical realism at all, but I just think the writing reminds me of those things. I don't know if anybody else sees that. Has anybody else read that? Am I like mad for making that connection? But yeah, I just think if you like those kind of writers, or if you like that kind of writing but don't like magic realism, this is probably a good one. But like I said, I'm not far into it. I trust I'm going to love it because my dad and my mum both love it, but I will reserve my opinion until I am finished. Those are all of the books I am currently reading, however. Hopefully some of them have sparked an interest for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have read or are planning on reading any of these books, and I'd love to know what you're currently reading. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you again soon. Bye guys!